I never thought I'd be that guy, the older man scoping out the younger crowd. But here I am, sitting at the bar, pretending to nurse a drink while I scan the room. It's not about being creepy. It's about finding something I can't seem to let go of, a connection, a spark, something that makes me feel alive again. But let's face it, as a gay man in his 50s, the pickings are slim, and the loneliness, well, that's a whole different beast. Another round? The bartender's voice pulls me back to reality. He's young, mid-20s maybe, with that effortless confidence only youth can give. I nod, even though I've barely touched my first drink. "Can I ask you something?" he says, leaning in a little closer than necessary. There's curiosity in his eyes, maybe even a hint of something more. "Why do you come here alone?" I could brush him off, but something about the way he looks at me makes me want to be honest. Just this once. I'm looking for something. Different, I say, choosing my words carefully. Someone who makes me feel something real. He smirks, like he's in on some joke I'm not privy to. "You might be in the wrong place for that, old man," he says, but there's no malice in his tone, just a simple truth. And he's right, of course, but it doesn't stop me from trying. Before I can reply, the door swings open, and in walks a guy who changes everything. He's got that easy grace, the kind that turns heads without trying, and he's definitely younger, late 20s, maybe early 30s. Our eyes meet, and there's a flicker of something that makes my heart skip a beat. He's trouble, I can tell, but trouble is exactly what I've been craving. As he moves through the crowd, it's like the room bends around him, people making way without even realizing it. He heads straight to the bar right next to me and orders a drink. Our shoulders brush, and it's like an electric current shoots through me. "Buy you a drink?" I ask, my voice a little too eager. But I don't care. "Sure," he says, smirking. "If you think you can keep up." I don't know what he means by that, but I'm damn sure going to find out. The night is young, and so is he. Exactly what I've been searching for, even if I didn't know it until now. The bartender gives me a look somewhere between a warning and a challenge, but I ignore it. Whatever happens next, I'm all in. The bar hums with low chatter, the kind that fills the gaps in conversation without overwhelming it. I hand over the money for his drink, the sound of bills sliding against the counter marking the start of something I can't quite name yet. He takes the glass, his fingers brushing mine, and that same electric current zaps through me again. "So," I say, trying to keep it casual, "what brings you here tonight?" He takes a sip, his eyes scanning the room before settling back on me. "Just looking for a good time," he says, his tone light. But there's something underneath it, something darker, more complicated. He's playing it cool, but I can see it in the way he holds himself, attention coiled tight, ready to spring. I lean in, lowering my voice. "And have you found it?" He smirks, a lazy, almost cocky grin that sends a thrill through me. "Depends," he says, meeting my gaze head on. "Are you offering?" Before I can answer, a loud burst of laughter from a group nearby interrupts us. He glances over, irritated, and for a moment I see a flash of something in his eyes. Frustration, maybe even anger, before he smooths it over with that practiced nonchalance. "Let's get out of here," he says suddenly, finishing his drink in one gulp and setting the glass down with a decisive thud. "This place is boring." It's not a question, but an expectation, and I find myself nodding before I've even processed what he's asked. There's a magnetism to him, a pull that I'm helpless to resist. We walk out together, the cool night air hitting me like a wake-up call, but there's no turning back now. Outside, the city pulses with life, cars speeding by, the distant wail of a siren, the hum of neon lights. He doesn't say a word, just starts walking, and I follow, trying to match his pace. We turn a corner, and the noise of the main street fades, replaced by the quieter sounds of a residential area. "You live around here?" I ask, more to break the silence than anything else. He shakes his head. "No, but I know a place." There's a finality in his tone that tells me not to ask more, so I don't. We walk in silence, the only sound our footsteps echoing off the buildings. He leads me down a narrow alley and my heart starts to race, the thrill of the unknown overtaking any lingering doubts. He stops in front of an unmarked door, pulls out a key, and unlocks it with a practiced ease. The door creaks open, and he steps inside, throwing a look over his shoulder that's half invitation, half dare. I hesitate just for a second before following him in, the door closing behind me with a final, echoing click. The room we enter is small, dimly lit by a single lamp in the corner. There's a bed against the wall, unmade, and a chair with clothes piled on it. It's not what I expected. Giddy, almost seedy. But there's something oddly comforting about it. It's real, unpolished, and it suits him. He doesn't waste any time. He turns to me, that smirk back on his face, and steps closer, his hand sliding up my arm, leaving a trail of warmth in its wake. "So what now?" he murmurs, his voice low, the challenge clear. I swallow hard, every instinct telling me this is a bad idea that I'm in over my head. But I've come this far, and the pull of him is too strong to resist. Now I say, leaning in until there's barely any space between us, "We see if you can keep up with me."
His grin widens, and before I can second, guess myself, his lips are on mine, fierce and demanding. There's no room for doubt now, no turning back. The night is ours, and whatever happens next, I'm ready for it.
The kiss is intense, raw, and completely consuming. It's like everything else falls away, my doubts, my reservations, leaving only the heat between us. His hands are on me, urgent, pulling me closer, and I respond with the same need, the same hunger. For a moment, it feels like we're the only two people in the world. But then, just as suddenly as it started, he pulls back, leaving me breathless, my heart pounding in my chest. He steps away, his eyes locking onto mine, and I can see the shift in him, the way his expression changes from lust to something more calculated. "Let's talk," he says, his tone unexpectedly serious. It's like a bucket of cold water has been dumped over me, and I blink, trying to catch up with the sudden change in pace.
Talk, I echo, still trying to shake off the haze of desire. About what?
He doesn't answer right away, just crosses the room to the small table by the bed and pulls out a chair, gesturing for me to sit. It's an odd moment. Him, suddenly playing host in this bare room, like he's been preparing for this conversation all along. I take the seat, more curious than anything now, while he leans against the wall, arms crossed, watching me. "You're older," he says bluntly, and there's no malice in it, just a statement of fact. "You've got experience, and you know what you want. That's what brought you to that bar tonight, right?" I nod slowly, wondering where he's going with this. "Yeah, I suppose so." He runs a hand through his hair, his demeanor shifting again, like he's weighing his words carefully. "Here's the thing, I don't do this for free. If you want more, if you want me, it's going to cost you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I should have seen this coming, but it still takes me by surprise. "Cost me," I repeat, trying to keep my voice steady, though I can feel my heart sinking. "Yeah," he says, meeting my gaze without flinching. "I'm not just some guy you picked up at a bar. I'm giving you an opportunity, a chance to have what you're looking for, without the bullshit of a real relationship. No strings, no complications, but it comes with a price." I lean back in the chair, processing what he's saying. It's not the first time I've heard a proposition like this, but something about the way he presents it, so direct, so matter of fact, makes it different, more tempting, and more dangerous. "And what exactly is that price?" I ask, my voice quieter now, almost resigned. He moves closer, his eyes dark, the intensity between us building again, but this time it's different, sharper, edged with something more transactional. "You take care of me," he says, his hand sliding into his pocket and pulling out a crumpled cigarette pack. He taps one out, lights it, and takes a drag before continuing. "I take care of you, financially, emotionally, physically. Whatever you need. But I don't do it for free." The cigarette smoke curls between us, hazy and thick. I should walk away. Everything in me says to leave now before I get in too deep. But instead, I find myself leaning forward, drawn in by the challenge, the promise of something I can't quite define. And what do you get out of it? I ask, my voice steady now, the initial shock wearing off. He exhales a stream of smoke, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considers his answer. Security, stability. A life that's not just scraping by. And maybe, he adds, a faint smile playing on his lips. Someone who actually gives a damn about me, even if it's just for a while. There's a vulnerability in his words, something raw and unguarded that catches me off guard. It's not just about money, I realize. It's about survival, about finding a way to make life work in a world that's been less than kind to him. I sit there, the weight of his offer hanging between us, and I know I'm at a crossroads. I can walk out that door and pretend this never happened, or I can stay and see where this road takes me, even if it's not what I expected. I take a deep breath, meeting his gaze head on. Okay, I say finally, the word heavy with implications. Let's talk business. He smiles then. A real smile this time, like he's won something, but there's a warmth to it that makes me feel like I haven't completely lost. Good, he says, stubbing out his cigarette and sitting down across from me. Let's get down to it. As we start to negotiate the terms, the air between us crackles with a new energy, part tension, part anticipation. It's not the kind of connection I thought I'd find tonight, but it's something real, something solid. And in this moment, that's enough for me. We spent the next hour ironing out the details, the air in the room, thick with the tension of two people trying to outmaneuver each other while pretending it's just business. His terms are straightforward: a place to stay, a monthly allowance, and the understanding that this arrangement is purely transactional. No strings, no illusions. In return, I get his time, his attention, and everything that comes with it. But as we talk, it becomes clear that this isn't just a simple exchange of money for companionship. There's an unspoken challenge in his eyes, a dare for me to see how far I'm willing to go, how much I'm willing to risk. And as much as I hate to admit it, I'm hooked. All right, I say finally, leaning back in the chair and crossing my arms over my chest. We've got a deal. He nods, his expression unreadable, but there's a flicker of something in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief. He reaches out to shake my hand, sealing the agreement with a firm grip that sends another jolt of electricity through me. As he pulls back, the room falls into a tense silence, the weight of what we've just agreed to settling over us like a heavy fog. It's not the kind of silence that comes from comfort, but the kind that signals we've just crossed a line we can't uncross. He's the first to break it, standing up and stretching, his movements languid and unhurried. I'm gonna take a shower, he says casually, as if we haven't just redefined the terms of our relationship, as if everything is normal. I watch him as he heads to the bathroom, the door clicking shut behind him, and for the first time, doubt starts to creep in. What the hell am I doing? This isn't what I wanted. Not really. I came here looking for something real, something that would fill the emptiness inside me, and instead I've locked myself into a deal that feels more like a trap than a solution. But before I can dwell on it too long, I hear the water start running, and the image of him in the shower. Steam rising, water slicking down his body. Pushes all rational thought from my mind. I stand up, shaking off the unease, and start pacing the small room, trying to get a grip. The decision is made, I remind myself. There's no point in second-guessing it now. But the doubt lingers, gnawing at the edges of my mind, making me question everything. When he finally emerges from the bathroom, a towel slung low around his hips, his hair wet and dripping, all I can do is stare. He's every bit as stunning as I imagined, but there's a vulnerability to him now, a softness that wasn't there before. And suddenly, I'm not just thinking about what I'm getting out of this deal. I'm thinking about him and what he's giving up.
You good? He asks, cocking an eyebrow at me as he grabs a fresh shirt from the pile of clothes on the chair. His voice snaps me out of my thoughts, and I realize I've been standing there, frozen, lost in my head.
Yeah, I say, clearing my throat, trying to sound more confident than I feel. I'm good. He nods, pulling the shirt over his head, and the moment passes, the tension easing just enough for me to breathe again. But as he starts getting dressed, moving on like everything's settled, the unease doesn't leave me. It sits there, heavy in my chest, a reminder that I've just made a choice I might not be able to undo. Before I can stop myself, I blurt out, "Why me?"
He pauses, mid-motion, and looks at me with an expression I can't quite read.
"Why did you pick me?" I ask, the words tumbling out before I can say it. "Guess them. You could have found anyone in that bar tonight. Why me?" For a moment, he just stares at me, his eyes searching mine like he's trying to figure out if I'm serious. Then, he sighs, a sound that's both resigned and tired, like he's carrying a weight that's too heavy to bear.
"Because," he says finally, his voice soft, almost vulnerable, "you looked like you needed someone too." The simplicity of his answer hits me harder than I expected, cutting through all my defenses. I don't know what to say, so I just stand there, feeling more exposed than I have in years.
He finishes getting dressed, the moment passing as quickly as it came. And when he looks at me again, the mask is back in place, his walls firmly up. "Don't overthink it," he says, his tone more guarded now. "This is just business, remember?" I nod, but his words linger in my mind long after he's finished speaking. Business. That's what this is supposed to be. But as I watch him move around the room, I can't help but wonder if it's already become something more. And if it has, what the hell am I supposed to do about it? As I lie down on the bed later that night, the events of the evening replaying in my mind, I know one thing for sure. I've just made a decision that's going to change everything, and there's no turning back now. The morning light filters through the thin curtains, casting a muted glow over the room. I'm awake before him, lying there in the quiet, staring at the ceiling. The weight of last night's decisions sits heavy on my chest, but there's no room for regret. Not now, not after everything we've set in motion. He stirs beside me, his movements slow and deliberate, like he's savoring the last moments of sleep. When his eyes finally open, they meet mine, and for a second there's a flicker of something, uncertainty maybe, or just the remnants of a dream. But it's gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same guarded look he had when we first met. "Morning," he says, his voice rough with sleep. He stretches, his muscles flexing beneath the sheets, and I can't help but watch him, captivated by the easy confidence he exudes, even in the morning light. "Morning," I reply, my voice sounding steadier than I feel. There's a tension between us now, the kind that comes from having crossed a line, and neither of us seems eager to address it. He sits up, the sheets pooling around his waist, and runs a hand through his tousled hair. "So, about last night." He begins, his tone careful, testing the waters. "Yeah," I say quickly, wanting to get ahead of whatever he's about to say. "We made a deal. I'm good with it if you are." He looks at me, his gaze sharp, like he's searching for any sign of hesitation. "You sure? We don't have to do this if you're having second thoughts." I sit up, mirroring his posture, and meet his eyes head on. "I'm sure," I say, with more conviction than I feel. "We both know what we're getting into. Let's just keep it simple." He nods slowly, seeming to accept my words, but there's a tension in his shoulders that tells me he's not entirely convinced. "All right," he says finally, getting out of bed and reaching for his clothes. "Then let's talk logistics." We move through the morning in a series of practical steps, ironing out the final details of our agreement. The apartment he's been crashing in belongs to a friend who's out of town, but it's not a permanent solution. We decide to find a place together. Something neutral, something that belongs to both of us, at least on paper.
"I know a realtor," I say as I button up my shirt, trying to sound casual. "We can check out some places this week."
He glances at me, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I shrug, trying to downplay it. "Just someone I know. It'll make things easier." "Sure," he says, pulling on his jeans and fastening the belt with a practiced motion. "The sooner, the better. I'm not looking to stay here much longer. There's a sense of urgency in his voice that makes me pause. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" I ask, the question slipping out before I can stop it. He stiffens just for a moment before shaking his head. "No trouble," he says, but his tone is too smooth, too rehearsed, just ready to move on. I don't press him, even though the doubt gnaws at me. There's something he's not telling me, something lurking beneath the surface, but I push it aside for now. We have an agreement, and I need to focus on that, on making this work, whatever it is. As we finish getting dressed, the atmosphere shifts, becoming more businesslike. We both know that this arrangement is a delicate balance, one that could tip into chaos if we're not careful. But for now, we're on the same page, and that's enough. Before we head out, he turns to me, his expression serious. "This only works if we're honest with each other," he says, his voice firm. "No secrets, no games. Agreed?" I nod, though the irony of his words isn't lost on me. Agreed. We step out into the bright morning, the city alive with the sounds of a new day. As we walk side by side, there's a strange sense of normalcy that settles between us, like we're just two people starting a new chapter together. But beneath that surface, the tension simmers, a constant reminder that this is anything but normal. As we part ways for the day, I can't shake the feeling that we're walking a tightrope, one wrong move away from disaster. But despite the risk, there's a thrill to it, a sense of excitement that keeps me moving forward, even as the doubts linger in the back of my mind. We've made our agreement. Now, all that's left is to see if we can live with it. The next few weeks pass in a blur of routine and secrecy, each day blending into the next as our arrangement starts to take shape. We find an apartment on the edge of the city, a sleek, modern place that's just anonymous enough to keep our lives separate from the rest of the world. It's ours in the sense that it belongs to both of us, but it's also not really mine or his. It's just a space we share, a neutral ground where we meet on agreed terms.
On the surface, everything seems to be going smoothly. I go to work. I handle my responsibilities, and then when the day ends, I return to this other life. A life where he's waiting for me, where our agreement is the unspoken rule that governs everything we do.
He's there when I walk through the door each evening, the tension of the day melting away as we slip into the rhythm we've established. We talk, but it's always light, small talk about nothing important, conversations that fill the space but never dig too deep. He keeps things casual, and I follow his lead even though there's a part of me that wants to push, to ask the questions I know he's not ready to answer. "Long day?" he asks one evening as I drop my bag by the door, shrugging out of my jacket. "Yeah," I reply, loosening my tie. "You?" He shrugs, flipping through a magazine on the couch. Same old. It's the same exchange we've had every day since we moved in, and it's starting to feel routine, predictable even. But beneath the surface, I can sense the cracks forming small fissures in the foundation we've built. There's an undercurrent of tension that neither of us acknowledges, but it's there, simmering just below the surface. As the days pass, I start to notice the little things. How he sometimes stays out late without explanation. How he avoids certain questions. How there are moments when he seems distant, lost in thought. I want to ask him where he goes, what he's thinking, but I hold back, telling myself that it's none of my business. We agreed to no strings, no complications, and I'm determined to stick to that. But then there are nights when he doesn't come home at all, and those are the hardest. I lie awake in the dark, staring at the empty space beside me, wondering where he is, who he's with, and why he's not here. The doubt creeps in, gnawing at me, but I push it down, reminding myself that this is the life we chose, the life I chose. One night, after he's been gone for hours, I finally hear the door open. He steps inside, his face drawn and tired, but when he sees me sitting there waiting for him, he forces a smile like everything's fine. "Sorry I'm late," he says, his voice light, but there's a rough edge to it that he can't quite hide. "Where were you?" The question slips out before I can stop it, the concern in my voice surprising even me. He pauses just for a second before giving me the same casual shrug he always does. I want to push, to ask more, but something in his expression stops me. There's hardness in his eyes, a warning that tells me to let it go. So I do, even though it leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. Okay, I say finally, forcing myself to smile. Glad you're back. He nods, the tension easing slightly as he moves past me into the kitchen. You hungry? He asks, pulling out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Starving, I reply, even though my appetite is the last thing on my mind. We sit down to dinner, the conversation flowing easily, but there's a distance between us now, a space that wasn't there before. I try to ignore it, to focus on the good things. The way he laughs at my jokes, the warmth of his hand when it brushes mine. But the doubt lingers, growing with each passing day. As we settle into bed that night, the silence stretching between us, I can't help but wonder how long we can keep this up. How long before the cracks in our facade become too big to ignore. But then he rolls over, his arm draping across my chest, and the warmth of his body against mine pushes the doubts away, at least for now. We're living a double life, straddling the line between reality and the fiction we've created together. And as much as I want to believe it's enough, a part of me knows that something's got to give. But until that day comes, I'm going to hold on to him, for as long as I can. The cracks in our double life start to widen, slowly at first, then all at once. It begins on a Friday night, one of those rare evenings when we're both home, no distractions, no secrets lurking in the shadows. We're sitting on the couch, a movie playing in the background, but neither of us is really watching. The air is thick with the unspoken tension that's been building between us, and I can feel it pressing down, heavy and suffocating. He's quieter than usual, his focus on his phone, scrolling through messages with a furrowed brow. I try to ignore it, to convince myself that it's nothing, but the silence is too loud, the distance between us too vast. Everything okay? I finally ask, my voice cutting through the stillness. He glances up, his expression guarded. Yeah, just work stuff, he says, but I can tell he's lying. There's something else, something he's not telling me, and the realization hits me like a punch to the gut.
Work stuff, I repeat, trying to keep my tone neutral. But there's an edge to it I can't quite hide. Since when do you bring work home?
He doesn't answer right away, just sets his phone down and runs a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. I don't want to get into it right now, he says, his voice clipped, as if that's supposed to be the end of the conversation. But it's not this time.
I lean forward, my heart pounding in my chest. No, we need to talk about this. You've been distant, disappearing for hours, sometimes days. You say it's nothing, but it's not nothing, and I'm not an idiot.
His eyes flash with something, anger, maybe, or guilt. But he quickly masks it with that practiced indifference. You're overreacting, he says, standing up abruptly like he can't stand to be near me right now. I told you, it's just work. But I'm not buying it. Not anymore. I'm overreacting. I snap, getting to my feet as well, the frustration boiling over. You vanish without a word. You vanish without a word. You're always on edge, and you think I'm overreacting.
He turns to face me, his expression hardening. This was supposed to be simple, he says, his voice cold. No strings, no complications, but you're turning it into something else.
The words cut deep, sharper than I expected. Simple! I echo, my voice trembling. Is that all this is to you? A simple transaction? He doesn't answer, just stares at me, his jaw clenched tight. The silence stretches heavy and suffocating until it's clear that neither of us knows how to fix this. We're standing on opposite sides of a chasm that's been growing between us for weeks, and now it feels impossible to bridge.
Finally, he sighs, the anger in his eyes dimming to something more resigned. Look, maybe this was a mistake, he says, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. Maybe we just...
The words hang in the air, and for a moment I don't know what to say. The thought of losing him, of this being over, hits me harder than I expected, but I can't deny the truth in his words. We've crossed lines we weren't supposed to, and now we're paying the price. But before I can respond, his phone buzzes again, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. He glances at it, and I see the flicker of something in his eyes. Far, maybe, or something worse. "What is it?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitates, then shakes his head. "Nothing," he says, but I can see right through him. I reach out, grabbing his arm, forcing him to meet my gaze. "Who is it? What's going on?"
For a moment, he looks like he's going to tell me, like he's about to let me in on whatever's been haunting him. But then he pulls away, his walls slamming back up. "It's nothing," he repeats, grabbing his jacket from the chair. "I have to go."
"Go. Where?" I demand, but he's already halfway to the door. "I'll be back later," he says, his voice distant, like he's already a million miles away. And just like that, he's gone, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving me standing there, alone and reeling from the sudden turn of events. The emptiness of the apartment presses in on me, the silence almost deafening. This is the turning point, I realize. The moment when everything shifts, when the delicate balance we've been trying to maintain finally collapses. And as much as I want to believe we can fix this, a part of me knows that things will never be the same. I sink back onto the couch, the movie still playing in the background, but I'm not watching. My mind is spinning, trying to make sense of everything, but all I can think about is the look in his eyes as he walked out the door. He's hiding something big, and I'm terrified that when the truth finally comes out, it'll be too much for either of us to handle. But for now, all I can do is wait. Wait for him to come back, wait for the other shoe to drop, and hope that when it does, we'll somehow survive the fallout. He doesn't come back that night. Or the next. By the third day, I'm a mess, half worried, half angry, and entirely exhausted from playing out every possible scenario in my head. The apartment feels emptier than ever, each tick of the clock on the wall like a hammer driving home the silence. My mind is a battlefield of what-ifs and maybes, but the one thing I can't shake is the sinking feeling that we've reached the end of the line. On the fourth day, the door finally opens, and he walks in. But something's different. His usual swagger is gone, replaced by a weariness that makes him look older, worn down by whatever's been haunting him. He's carrying a duffel bag, and I know, before he even says a word, that this is it. "Hey," he says, his voice rough, like he's been through hell and back. He sets the bag down by the door, and the sight of it makes my chest tighten with dread. "Where the hell have you been?" I ask, trying to keep the anger out of my voice, but it's there, bubbling just beneath the surface. He sighs, rubbing the back of his neck as he looks anywhere but at me. "I had to sort some things out," he says, his tone vague, evasive. "Sort what out?" I press, but I already know I'm not going to get a straight answer.
"Stuff," he says, finally meeting my eyes, and there's a finality in his gaze that sends a chill down my spine. "Listen, I think it's time we ended this."
The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. I knew this was coming, but hearing it out loud still feels like a knife to the heart. "What are you talking about?" I ask, even though it's painfully clear. He glances at the bag by the door, then back at me. "This. Whatever we had, it's not working anymore. We both know that."
I shake my head, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. Anger, hurt, fear. "You can't just walk away," I say, my voice trembling. "Not like this. We can talk about it. Figure it out."
"There's nothing to figure out." He cuts me off, his tone firm but not unkind. This was never meant to last, and we both knew that going in. I want to argue, to beg him to stay, but the look in his eyes stops me cold. He's already gone, I realize. Whatever connection we had, whatever kept us together, it's gone, and there's nothing I can do to bring it back.
"Why now?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "What changed?" He looks away, his jaw tight, like he's fighting to keep it together. "I did," he says finally, and the raw honesty in his voice cuts through the fog of my anger. I've been lying to myself, pretending this was enough, but it's not. I need to get my life together. And I can't do that while I'm stuck here.
I stare at him, the reality of the situation sinking in. He's not just leaving me, he's leaving everything we built together, the life we tried to create. And as much as it hurts, a part of me knows he's right. We've been living in a bubble, trying to hold on to something that was never really sustainable. Is this about someone else? I ask, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay calm. He shakes his head, stepping closer, but not too close. No, this is about me. About trying to figure out who I am, what I want. I thought I could do that here with you, but I can't. His words hang in the air, and I'm left grappling with the reality that this is truly the end. So that's it. I ask more to myself than to him. We're just done. He doesn't answer right away, just nods slowly, the pain in his eyes mirroring my own. I'm sorry, he says, and I can tell he means it. I didn't want it to end like this.
Neither did I. But there's nothing left to say. He picks up his duffel bag, slinging it over his shoulder, and for a moment we just stand there, staring at each other, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us.
Take care of yourself, he says, his voice softer now, almost tender.
You too, I managed to reply, my throat tight with emotion. And then he's gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that leaves me feeling hollowed out, like the world has shifted on its axis. The silence that follows is deafening, and I'm left alone in an apartment that suddenly feels too big, too empty.
I sink onto the couch, the same couch where we spent so many nights pretending everything was fine, and let the reality of it all wash over me. It's over. Whatever we had, whatever we were trying to build, it's gone. And now all I can do is pick up the pieces and figure out how to move on.
The emptiness is overwhelming, but there's a strange kind of relief in it too, a sense of finality, of knowing that the worst is behind me. It's not the ending I wanted, but maybe it's the one we needed. And as I sit there, alone with my thoughts, I realize that maybe, just maybe, this is the first step toward finding something real, something that isn't built on lies or half-truths, but on something solid, something true.
For now, though, all I can do is breathe, let the pain settle in, and take it one day at a time. The breakup was inevitable, but the future is still mine to shape. The days that follow blur together in a haze of routine and emptiness. The apartment feels like a ghost of the life we tried to build, every corner holding memories that now seem distant, almost unreal. I go through the motions, work, eat, sleep, but everything is tinted with the dull ache of loss, the kind that doesn't hit all at once but slowly seeps in, taking root in the quiet moments.
It's a Saturday morning when it finally catches up to me. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of me, staring out the window at the city below. The sun is shining, the world is moving on as it always does. But I'm stuck, replaying everything that led to this point. The arguments, the silences, the lies we told each other and ourselves. It's all so clear now, in hindsight, how we were always headed for this end.
I think back to the first night we met. How he walked into that bar and turned my life upside down with a single look. I wanted something real, something to fill the void that had been growing inside me for years. And for a while I thought I'd found it. But now, sitting here alone, I see how much of it was an illusion, how we were both using each other to fill our own voids, but never really facing the truth of what we were. I grab my phone, scrolling through old messages, photos, anything that might give me a clue as to where it all went wrong. But the more I look, the more I realize that the cracks were there from the beginning. We were just too blinded by our own needs to see them. There's a text thread from a few weeks ago, one of those brief, casual exchanges that we used to have when things were still good, at least on the surface. He'd sent a picture of some fancy restaurant he'd passed by with a joking comment about taking me there someday. I remember smiling at the time, feeling like we were building something real, something that could last. But now, looking at it with fresh eyes, I see the distance that was already there, hidden beneath the surface. I closed the messages and tossed the phone aside, frustration bubbling up. How did I let it get this far? How did I convince myself that this was what I wanted? The answer, when it comes, is as simple as it is painful. I was afraid of being alone, afraid of facing the reality that maybe I wasn't meant for the kind of love I'd always dreamed of. So I settled for something less, something that felt safe, even though it was anything but. But as the hours pass and the city moves on outside, something shifts in me. The anger, the regret, the endless questioning. It all starts to fade, replaced by a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about him leaving. It was about me, too. About the choices I made, the things I ignored, the ways I lied to myself to avoid the truth. I realize now that I was never really in love with him, not in the way that matters. I loved the idea of him, the comfort of having someone to come home to, but the real connection, the deep, honest love I craved, it was never there. And that's why it ended the way it did, with both of us realizing that we were holding on to something that wasn't real. As the day wears on, I start to feel lighter, like a weight has been lifted off my chest. It's not that the pain is gone. It's still there, lingering at the edges, but it doesn't control me anymore. For the first time in weeks, I feel like I can breathe again, like I'm starting to find my way out of the fog. I stand up from the table, the decision coming to me as naturally as breathing. I need to move on, to let go of this place and everything it represents. It's time to start fresh, to find something real, something that doesn't rely on lies or convenience. Over the next few days, I start the process of packing up the apartment. It's harder than I thought it would be, sorting through the remnants of our life together, but with each box I tape up, I feel a little more at peace. This is the right thing to do. I know that now. We both needed something from each other, but that chapter is over. It's time to write a new one, on my own terms. One evening, as I'm packing the last of my things, I find a note he left behind. It's short, just a few lines scribbled on a piece of scrap paper, but it hits me harder than I expected. I'm sorry it had to end this way. I hope you find what you're looking for. It's not much, but it's enough. Enough to remind me that, despite everything, there was some good in what we had, even if it wasn't meant to last. I tucked the note away in a box, the only thing of his I'm taking with me. The next morning, I lock the door to the apartment for the last time, the key feeling heavy in my hand. I take one last look around, then walk away, leaving behind the ghost of the life we tried to build. It's not easy, but with each step, I feel a little more like myself, a little more ready to face whatever comes next. As I step out into the sunlight, the city bustling around me, I realize that this isn't just an ending, it's a beginning. And this time, I'm going to do it right. No more settling, no more lying to myself. I'm going to find something real, something that lasts. And as I walk away from the apartment, I know that, somehow, I will. The new apartment is smaller, more modest, but it feels like a blank slate, a place where I can start over without the weight of the past pressing down on me. The first night here, I sit on the floor with a takeout container balanced on my lap, surrounded by unpacked boxes. The quiet is different this time, less oppressive, more like the calm that comes after a storm. I didn't bring much with me, just the essentials and a few things that hold real meaning. The note he left is tucked away in a drawer, out of sight but not forgotten. It's a reminder of what I've been through, but also of how far I've come. As the days turn into weeks, I settle into a new routine, one that's entirely my own. I get up early, go for runs in the park, and take my time with breakfast. Work is steady, and I've started making more of an effort to connect with friends, people I'd neglected during the time I was lost in that other life. It's not perfect. There are still moments when the loneliness creeps in, when I catch myself thinking about him, wondering where he is, what he's doing. But those moments pass more quickly now, and they don't leave the same lingering ache they once did. One afternoon, I find myself back in the neighborhood where we first met. It's not intentional. I'm just out for a walk, clearing my head. But when I see the bar, it all comes flooding back. The memories, the excitement of that first night, the spark that felt so real in the moment. I stand outside for a minute, considering going in, but then I shake my head and keep walking. There's no point in revisiting the past. No reason to dig up old ghosts. I'm not the same person I was back then, and I'm not looking for the same things anymore. Instead, I head to a coffee shop a few blocks away, one I've never been to before. It's small and cozy, with soft music playing in the background and the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. I order a drink and find a seat by the window, watching the world go by outside. As I sit there sipping my coffee, I realize how much has changed. Not just in my life, but in how I see myself. The man I was back then, desperate for connection, willing to settle for anything that filled the void, isn't who I am now. I've learned that real love, real connection, isn't something you can force or buy or pretend into existence. It has to be built on something true, something honest. I've also learned that being alone doesn't have to mean being lonely. It can mean taking the time to understand who you are, what you want, and not settling for less than you deserve. And that's exactly what I'm doing now. Learning to be okay with myself, to find happiness in the small things, and to be open to whatever comes next, without trying to control or rush it. As the afternoon light starts to fade, I finish my coffee and head back out into the city. The streets are busy, full of people going about their lives, and I feel a strange sense of belonging, like I'm part of something bigger, even if I'm just one person in a crowd. There's no grand epiphany, no sudden moment of clarity, just a quiet understanding that I'm on the right path, that I'm moving forward, even if it's just one step at a time. And for now, that's enough. I walk back to my apartment as the sun sets, the sky turning shades of orange and pink. When I get home, I put on some music, open a bottle of wine, and start unpacking the last of the boxes. It feels good to create a space that's entirely mine, filled with things that make me happy, not reminders of what I've lost. Later, as I sit on the couch with a glass of wine in hand, I think about the future. Not with anxiety or fear, but with a sense of quiet anticipation. I don't know what's coming, but I'm ready for it, whatever it is. And as I drift off to sleep that night, the last thought that crosses my mind is a simple one. I'm going to be okay. Not just okay. I'm going to be happy. It might take time. It might not be easy, but I'm finally on my way.